Think about the last time your group of friends had to decide where to eat. No one was officially in charge. No one had a title. Yet somehow, someone's opinion carried more weight, and the group naturally followed it. Now, imagine that same invisible process deciding something far more serious. Where to sleep tonight, whether to fight or flee, who eats first when food is scarce. Early humans faced these exact decisions every single day, without kings, without governments, and without anyone holding a formal position of power. By the end of this video, you will understand how early human groups actually made decisions without anything resembling the leadership structures we rely on today.
It's easy to assume every human group throughout history needed a clear leader to function. Someone giving orders, someone everyone obeyed without question. But for most of early human history, that structure simply did not exist. There were no titles, no crowns, no official chain of command. And yet early human groups still managed to survive, make decisions, and avoid total chaos. So how did that actually work? The answer lies in something far more fluid than formal leadership. Early human groups operated primarily through situational influence rather than fixed authority. This means the person whose voice carried the most weight changed depending entirely on the situation at hand. During a hunt, the most experienced and skilled hunter naturally took the lead, not because anyone appointed them, but because their knowledge in that specific moment kept everyone safer and more successful. Once the hunt ended, however, that same person did not automatically control decisions about food distribution or conflict resolution. Someone else with more relevant experience often stepped forward instead.
This is a fundamentally different system than what most people imagine when they think about ancient leadership. There wasn't one person standing above the group making every decision. Instead, leadership shifted naturally based on who actually knew what they were doing in any given moment. Now, compare that to how modern society typically works. Today, leadership is usually fixed. A manager remains a manager, regardless of whether they understand every task better than their employees. A political leader holds power across countless unrelated decisions simply because of their title. This is actually a relatively recent development in human history. For an overwhelming majority of human existence, expertise mattered more than position. There's a psychological reason this situational leadership system worked so effectively for early humans. Trust was earned through demonstrated ability, not simply granted through status. If someone consistently made good decisions during hunts, people trusted their judgment during hunts specifically. That trust did not automatically transfer to unrelated situations, like resolving a dispute between two group members.
This meant early human groups were naturally resistant to the kind of unchecked power that later leadership systems would eventually struggle with throughout history. If someone became overly controlling or made consistently poor decisions, the group simply stopped listening to them in that context. There was no formal punishment required. Influence quietly shifted elsewhere. Compare that to modern leadership structures, where poor decision-making at the top does not always result in an immediate loss of authority. A leader can remain in a position of power long after losing the trust or respect of the people they're supposedly leading. Early human groups did not have that problem in the same way. Authority in ancient life was far more directly tied to actual demonstrated value to the group. Now, here's where things become even more interesting. Even without formal leadership, early human groups still needed some way to resolve disagreements and reach group decisions. So how did that actually happen without a designated authority figure?
Anthropologists studying small-scale societies today that maintain similarly loose leadership structures have identified something fascinating. Group discussion. Not formal debate, not structured meetings. Simply open conversation until something resembling agreement naturally emerged. Everyone's perspective was heard, even if not everyone's opinion carried equal weight in that specific context. This process was slower than a single leader simply issuing a command, but it created something valuable that top-down leadership often struggles to achieve: genuine buy-in. When people participate in reaching a decision rather than simply being told what to do, they tend to support that decision far more willingly. This is strikingly similar to something modern workplaces and even friend groups still rely on today: even if we rarely think about it in these terms. The most effective informal leaders in your own life are probably not the people who simply demand obedience. They're the people whose input you actually trust, because they've consistently demonstrated good judgment in specific situations.
Modern leadership theory has spent decades essentially rediscovering something early humans intuitively practiced for tens of thousands of years. There's also an important survival reason this flexible system worked so well for early human groups specifically. Small group survival required rapid adaptability. A rigid, fixed leadership structure where one person made every decision regardless of expertise created a dangerous bottleneck. If that one person made a poor decision during an unfamiliar crisis, the entire group suffered the consequences. By allowing influence to shift naturally toward whoever had the most relevant knowledge in each moment, early human groups built a kind of built-in safeguard against catastrophic leadership failure. No single person's mistake could permanently damage the group's decision-making ability because authority was never permanently concentrated in one person to begin with.
This also explains why early human groups tended to remain relatively small. This kind of fluid, situational leadership works remarkably well in small groups, where everyone personally knows everyone else's strengths and weaknesses. But it becomes significantly harder to maintain as group size increases. When you no longer personally know everyone in your community, determining who actually deserves trust in a specific situation becomes far more difficult. This is very likely one of the key reasons more formal, fixed leadership structures eventually emerged as human societies grew larger. It wasn't that fixed leadership was inherently superior. It was that situational trust, based on leadership, becomes almost impossible to manage once a group grows beyond a certain size.
Formal titles and hierarchies essentially became a practical solution to a scaling problem, rather than a natural improvement on how humans preferred to organize themselves. Now imagine applying ancient decision-making logic to your own life today. In many ways, you probably already do this more than you realize. You likely don't ask your most emotionally supportive friend for financial advice. You probably don't ask your most financially savvy friend for relationship advice. Without consciously thinking about it, you naturally distribute trust and influence across different people based on their specific demonstrated strengths. This is the exact same instinct early humans relied on for survival, simply applied to much lower stakes decisions in modern daily life.
There's something worth sitting with here. Modern society often assumes that clear, fixed hierarchy is the most natural and efficient way for humans to organize themselves. But the deeper history of human decision-making tells a very different story. For the vast majority of human existence, flexibility mattered more than fixed authority. Adaptability mattered more than rigid control. And trust had to be earned repeatedly, rather than assumed permanently through a title. This raises an interesting question about modern leadership itself. If early humans thrived for tens of thousands of years using fluid, earned trust-based influence rather than fixed, permanent authority, what does that suggest about the leadership systems we've built today? Perhaps the healthiest version of leadership, even now, is not about holding a permanent position of power, but about consistently earning trust in the specific areas where your judgment has actually proven valuable.
Modern systems obviously require some degree of fixed structure, simply due to scale. Millions of people cannot make every decision through open group discussion the way a small band of early humans once could. But the underlying psychological instinct clearly hasn't disappeared. You still instinctively trust certain people more in certain situations, regardless of their official title or position. Maybe that's the most important insight buried in this ancient pattern. Authority was never meant to be permanent or absolute. It was meant to be earned, situation by situation, through demonstrated ability, and lost just as easily when that trust stopped being justified. So the next time you find yourself naturally deferring to a specific person's judgment in one area of your life, while trusting someone completely different in another, remember this. You're not being inconsistent. You're running one of the oldest and most effective decision-making systems human beings have ever developed. a system built long before anyone ever wore a crown or held a formal title of power. Maybe leadership was never really about having permanent control over others. Maybe it was always about being the person the group could genuinely trust in the moment that mattered most. If this changed the way you think about leadership and authority, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because we explore stories exactly like this every single week, uncovering how ancient humans really lived, thought, and survived long before recorded history began.